Welcome back, MTG Joe here, and we are here for some weekly meta on Arena. So what we try to do here is kind of look through a bunch of different statistics for seeing what is the best performing decks in a variety of formats: standard best of one, best of three, historic best of one, best of three. We also take a look at recent tournament results. And really what we're trying to do is just see, what's kind of the flavor of the week, what's performing well, what's kind of countering the meta, and going from there. As always, we're getting predominantly all our stats from Untapped GG. It is a companion tool that runs alongside Arena, tracks all your games, as well as all the other user games that are using the tool, and puts together these good analytics to see what's performing well. It's free to use. The link is in the video description down below, so if you click that, lets them know that I sent you there, and it's a free way to support the channel. Before we jump in, as always, if you do enjoy the content, if you can, drop a like, comment, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe. All are free and easy ways to help support the channel. Anyways, jumping into it. So we got standard best of one. We are looking from a time frame of October 4th to today, which is Monday, October 11th, so 7-day period. We are looking at Diamond to Mythic for this specific range at 67,000 matches. So a really good sample size here. And what we're seeing is the dominance of aggro decks still in best of one. We have the exile based mono white aggro list. We have two of them in particular. So this is the list that I was playing as well, that I got to Mythic 62 with really early, like day 2 in the season. Pretty much the same, just a slight variation where they're playing a Legion Angel main, where I don't have that, and I'm down 1 Elite Spellbinder for 2 Maul of the Skyclaves. But otherwise, what this deck is trying to do is play the 1-drop Stonebinder's Familiar to scale up your creatures. So the individual threats are better in this deck, and you have more interaction, I find, than the Cast 2 version of the deck, and you're just trying to scale up. You also have Sun Gold Sentinel, which serves a lot of different roles in this deck. It can exile cards in your opponent's graveyard that grows the dog, but it can also hit stuff like Memory Deluge or flashback spells, stuff of that nature. Also, when you have Coven, it becomes pseudo unblockable, so you can put a bunch of counters on it with stuff like Luminarch Aspirant, and then give it unblockable and just smash in. This version is also playing 8 exile effects in Brutal Cathar and Skyclave Apparition, and paired with the Portable Hole. So 10 pieces of removal for best of one. We have this version here as well that, from what I can tell, is identical. I don't know why. Oh no, it's got 1 extra land. So the only difference is this version's on 2 caves versus this version that's on 1 cave. So overall, we have quite a few matches here. I like the 2 cave version. I like 6 creature lands. It just helps insulate the flood because you don't have Paladin class. You don't have a lot to feed the extra mana into. And 23 lands was the sweet spot. I tried for a while at 22, and because there's a higher density of 3 drops in this deck, you want to have the 23rd land. We see mono green, which is kind of a staple of the format. And what we're seeing now with mono green is they are going for a little bit more of a ramp package. So this version's playing Lotus Cobra, but I've seen a lot of the mono green lists move towards the elf that untaps snow permanents, snowlands, as guaranteed ramp, where Cobra is kind of contingent on having a land in hand. But this version here is playing 4 unnatural growths, which helps the creature mirrors just because you get bigger than your opponent. It also helps with the the Izzet decks to have burn-based removal. I'm personally a fan of the 4 Brawl, 3 Inscription versions, but I haven't played the natural growth version, so this is something I would probably try out to see how it plays out. Notably, they are on none of the green creature lines and just on the Faceless Havens. We see Izzet turns, a staple of best of 3, find its way into best of 1, taking full advantage of the 7-slotted wish board. Really, this version, I'm sure most of you have seen this at this point. What you're trying to do is with Galvanic Iteration, copy extra turn spells to get 2, 3, 4 turns in a row. We see Mono Green Stompy. This is the version I was mentioning with Sculptor of Winter. So this is kind of the, I think, Paulo Vitor da Milagrosa's version, where they had one of the Primal Adversary in here, and then they were playing the Sculptor of Winter, and then a couple copies of Ren. We see Bant Party. This is something that Crokies was playing to some extent. So this is a version. This deck I found is tough for the creature decks because they go so wide with the squad commander. This was always one I had trouble with mono white, but I haven't played it since S22. So something we should probably revisit soon enough. Mono black control, kind of a Blood on the Snow style deck. There's very differentiations of these decks. This one's with the Meat Hook. You have your creatures here with the Lulth on the top end. This one's interestingly playing Hostile. I think this was a CGB deck at one point, but I'm not a fan of Hostile. Just seems like sorcery speed kind of slow in that regards. We see Temur Ramp, which is basically green, red, Gruul kind of dragons, mainboarding a couple negates. I found this is what I played in the standard challenge, a very similar version to this. And then Azorius Control, which we played a variation on the channel. This particular version is running Leer in the main board. This was something I was considering in my deck, just having another threat to recycle some of your spells. And then you can always bounce it back with like Fading Hope and stuff like that. So that's best of 1 meta. Let's jump to best of 3. For best of 3, just to get a reasonable population size, I went Platinum to Mythic to get 36,000 games. And here we see Mono Green doing the best on the ladder, followed closely by the Mono White deck. This version is on 3 Ren. It is on the Cobra versus the Sculptor of Winter, a 4-2 split of fight spells, and then 1 Unnatural Growth in the main board. Does have a Shaya, which is interesting, I guess, for the bounce effects if it says non-land permanent. Devouring Tendrils is just another fight spell that allows you to work through by dealing damage. And then this version is doing a 2-2 split of Lair and Faceless Haven. So 67% win rate on this particular one. We have Mono White Aggro here. Very much similar to the list we saw. It does have Maul and Chaplain in this version. It is shaving down some numbers of the exile effects, and does have Adeline, which Adeline and Maul, if you haven't done so, is amazing. It is my jam. Interesting, you have stuff like Arcane, a bunch of just powerful 3-drop effects here. We see the Paulo Vito de Milagrosa version from Worlds of Mono Green. So Mono Green's got a lot of different flavors. We see the Professor version as well with some Froghemoths. We see Azorius Control. It's not really Control, this is the Tempo version. This is Nori, it's one of the Japanese players, I apologize. We played this list the other day as well. If you want to see this one in action, it is on my YouTube. This is the Azorius Tempo deck, so it's like a mashup of Mono White Aggro with disruption effects. You have like Malevolent Hermit, you have Spectral Adversary to tempo out your opponent, some bounce and counter spells as well. It's kind of like Spell Pierce at home, no name Spell Pierce, and you can kind of tempo out your opponents. See, Is It Dragons, which has actually taken over the Turns mantle. Everyone was kind of teching for the Turns deck that they just didn't pack answers for Goldspan. So we've seen a resurgence of the Goldspan Dragon, and this is what I believe the World Champ won with. The one of Dissipate version kind of stands out. So we see the Dragons deck from the Worlds. Mono Black Control, this is the one that has been around for a couple weeks with the Sedgemoor Witch, kind of Tybalt cast off your treasure style effect. Selesnya Grid Range, which is just the festival decks, which have largely fallen off. Just with the prevalence of so many counter spells, these decks are soft without being able to really impact the turn decks. Like outside of Redain, you're not really slowing them down too much. You see Temur Turns, which is another take on Galvanic Turns. Kind of let's put all the busted cards together in a deck, but it seems like it's a little bit less efficient than just the straight Is It version. And then we see some more Dragons decks. So that's from Untapped. We're going to jump over quickly to the SCG Tour. This is the 5K that they ran this weekend. So this is how they do is they do 8 satellite runs. And then if you have 4 wins, 4, 5, or 6 wins, you get to play in the Sunday tournament. So this is the results of the Sunday tournament. So Mono Green Aggro overall won it. It's pretty much like what we've seen the players. You have Mono Green, Mono White, Is It Epiphany, Is It Dragons? And then the Grixis takes Grixis Dragons is basically the Grixis Lier version that some of the Worlds players were playing. The list that kind of stands out to me as an interesting one that we'll try out is the Jim Davis and I think Daniel Jessup was the original to play this deck. It's the Mirror Control deck that's using Xanathar, which is actually awesome, and Lier. So something I want to try out there, see how that one plays out. Just scrolling down quickly, we see the participants and the decks themselves that have joined for this event. We have 39 mono greens, 25 mono whites, a bunch of Epiphany decks, some Dimir control on that. If we look at win rates, mono green, pretty much on par, 199, so 50% win rate. Mono white actually had the highest win rate in this tournament, 55.96. Epiphany's at 55. The Grixis version actually did a lot worse at 40%. Dragons had a resurgence where we saw last week Dragons was performing really poorly, sub 50%. So it seems like it's had a snapback this week. Despite Jim's good performance with Dimir control, still sub 50. Azorius Epiphany not doing too well. Sultai Ramp, decent. They had 4 decks, and then we just kind of go down the list. The Azorius Tempo deck that we saw did really poorly. But overall, I would say once you go down to like these numbers, there's too small of a sample size to really look at percentages. So if we look at MTG data, which is another great kind of visualized tool, so they aggregated all the tournament results, all the games. So 2,175 matches included in the event, and these exclude mirror matches, which is important because with mirror matches, you're naturally going to normalize towards 50% because you're always going to have a winner and a loser in that case for the same deck. So if we look at performance, the top performing deck over the weekend was mono white aggro. Pretty much positive win rates, 60%. The only downside is the Dragons. They went 7-21, and Sultai Festival 50%, but it's pretty small sample size. But notably, if we look at the mono green matchup, positive. Is it turns matchup, positive. Grixis turns, positive. Zorius turns, positive. So we see a lot against the more predominant decks. Is it turns actually had a pretty bad weekend. I was beating up on the Grixis variant, which is actually built to ideally beat up on that. Same with like the Azorius Tempo deck. So they kind of got one-overed on that. Mono green continues to do well, surprisingly pretty poor against the mono white deck. Seems like Sultai is beating up on these creature decks, but losing to the other. If we look at Sultai Festival, they're losing to the turns decks, Azorius decks, basically the counterspell decks. They're doing worse against those. And Is It Dragons, although poor against mono green, which is its worst matchup, we see the turns deck, it's 73%, mono white 75%, Grixis turn. So it's got some good like aggressive matchups. The mirror control deck, small sample size, so we can't really confirm anything like that. I think you probably don't want to be on this Azorius turns deck. Seems to be performing pretty poor against your 3 top decks, so they came in with a bad meta choice, I think, just going your top 3 decks and you're all sub like 50% win rates. So yeah, that wraps up standard. We'll hop over quickly for some historic, and here we're at Platinum to Mythic for best of 1, 60,000 matches. So Mono Red Burn coming in with a 65% win rate. Notably, no Vortex in the main board of this one, and they are playing Thermo Alchemist, which is interesting. This is a Gengantha version, so you're not playing any dual red. Pretty much just the burn. They've wisely updated the list to play with Fire instead of a Shock. It's just upside on this card. Notably, no creature lands in this particular version, so this one's looking to burn you out fast. We see Jeskai Control, 1 copy of Sacred Fire, and they've moved to a split of 2/2 with Absorb and Archmage Charm. So nothing like super innovative with that list. See mono white humans, no new tech in this particular version. Elves largely has been the same. Cool thing with Untapped, like you can see, like I can build this deck, I can build this deck on just a ton of wild cards off. Never bought into Elves. Is It Delver? Looks to be a newer deck that's on the format. We have Delver paired with kind of the DRC Sprite Dragon Brazen Borer. We have the Consider Opt. Is it Consider and Opt or just Consider? Just Consider, but we have Spell Pierce and Lofty Denial as kind of like pay counters. And then we have some Curious Obsessions as well for card advantage. So kind of a mashup of mono blue tempo and into an Is It deck. So something we should probably try out as well on the channel. We see the kind of creature-based mono red version, looking to Ember Cleave out with the Reckless Ringleader, giving them haste. See Elves again, the Madness, Trickery, still holding a 57% win rate, which is impressive at this point here. And this is upwards, like, you know, Plat and Mythic, Auras, and then Temur Flash was a new deck that came out. This version here, the teamer elements of it is really just the lightning strikes, as well as flame sweep as a sweeper for the cheaper creature matchups. We have like test of talents for the, and then otherworldly gaze, the not quite brainstorm. Some remands, and you're basically winning. This one's interesting. No Gear Hulk, you're just playing Brineborn as a cheap threat and trying to scale it up to the late game. Notably, no creature lines as well. I always like to look at creature lines in these decks to see how they play out. And similarly, October 4th, Plat to Mythic, 13,000 matches in best of 3. We have Selesnya Company. We have 2 versions of it. It's basically a mono white humans list, splashing green for Sigarda, as well as some interaction like Dramoka's Command and Yasharn. I really like this deck. It's what I was playing last month towards the end of the season. I think it has a lot of effective tools against Jeskai, and can be post-board shifted to deal with the creature matchups. So this version here, this version's on a couple copies of Catilda, as well as Augur of Autumn. And then trying out copies of like Vivian in the sideboard and Outline Liberator. I've actually been much more of a fan of Gideon. I went up to 2. I personally don't like Redain in the sideboard of these, because when you think about it, this is coming in predominantly against like your big mana decks, your sweepers, to slow them down. But unlike standard, Jeskai plays 3 mana, Anger of the Gods, Sweltering Suns, which just hit this Redain anyways. So you end up playing this card that's supposed to be good against Jeskai, but it ends up getting just swept. So I switched this to another copy of Gideon in my version, and have liked it like that. They have a hard time dealing with Gideon, and I've actually found Selfless Glyph Weaver to be a more effective spell against these sweeper-based decks, as kind of a Selfless Savior style effect for your whole board. The deck that's kind of been killing it, so Wyatt Darby played it, and then Ash Lizzle got up to like 5, I think, Mythic. It's a black-white zombies deck, so you're playing a bunch of the new zombies. Enter the battlefield effects of Corpse Knight and Wayward Servant to drain your opponent. Undead Augur draws you cards, and then you have Return to the Ranks to bring back a bunch of zombies, and you kind of combo kill your opponent by draining them out. So this is a deck I want to try out. I'm just short on wild cards, as you can see. And then we see Jeskai Control as well coming in. Gear Hulk, Epiphany version. Nothing too innovative here. Notably, they're playing 1 Nezahal. Actually, 2 Nezahal on the side. So probably a concession to the mirror matches. In addition to, so it looks like they're moving off the Gear Hulk and going Nezahal recently. So that's it for Meta Monday. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, if there's any kind of under-the-radar decks that I've missed out on. And we'll catch you next time. As always, a lot of these decks we have played on the channel, so if you want to see gameplay, just check out the respective playlists. You have Standard and Historic. If there's anything you'd like to see in the future, drop a note. And as always, like I mentioned, if you can, free way to support the channel, as always, is to like, comment, and if you want to keep up with the content, subscribe. They're all free and easy ways to help out. Thanks for watching, and have a great one.